make sure that that's still happening, and also safety is still, guaranteed, and also be ready for our students.
Yeah, before we move ahead to this, are there any other arguments in favor for smartphones in schools that you want to make sure is part of the discussion today? Yeah, we have a discussion. Yeah.
I'm Fraser O'Leary. I was on the state board of education. Test. Technology. Schools didn't have. That's what I'm talking about. Address the lack of. There are.
I think thankfully that has been addressed in this legislation, with the exception of
But that's a great, yeah. So access.
Access.
Markets to our schools and a lot of stuff away from them. So I think that there also that feeling of can I bring myself to school, right? And what does it go through the building, go through all this bureaucracy, be basically searched, and also have to take it for you. I think students react to that as
Hi, I'm Gabby. One thing I've heard, and this is addressed in the legislation, but is concerned for students with disabilities or students who are identified.
Yeah, I heard a similar argument to the one that both of y'all brought up, but speaking to yours was that idea of like cell phones are the most valuable item for the students' phones at that age. So making sure that we're respecting that because it is a very important possession.
And so thinking about like autonomy, kind of making sure that students have autonomy. Things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to center this around current legislation in DC, and we luckily have the council member who has introduced this bill with us for PITA. So the bill introduced in City Council is called the Heads Up Distraction-Free Learning Amendment Act of 2025, and it seeks to ban smartphones, gaming devices, and smartwatches. Keeping in mind that watches are also a distraction in DCPS schools and public charters. It would allow schools flexibility to choose the enforcement that suits the needs of their school, and that's going to be a big piece of our discussion at the end. Is if this passes, what are the best practices for how schools should implement that? Knowing we have school leaders in the room who might take from this discussion some ideas. And a public hearing on this bill will be held this Tuesday. So I believe the hearing decided public comment did end yesterday. But being aware that this discussion is ongoing on Tuesday. And the bill was introduced by Councilmember Pinto. Is there anything you want to add before we go on? We do have a little more about what's in the bill, but feel free to jump in. All right, well, feel free to jump in at any point. Absolutely. So, like we said, a couple key exceptions in the DC bill that are really important. The first one, to your point in the back, students with disabilities would be permitted to have their device that is listed in their IEP or 504. So those documents would need to be updated to reflect this policy in the bill passed. It also allows teachers to permit exceptions, so allow photos under certain circumstances, if it's necessary for instructional purposes, and allow teachers and administrators to grant access to devices if they're needed for a health or a safety emergency. Are there exceptions that you feel that this bill is missing, or is there improvements?
so iPads or iPads covered in this? They will have an iPad at school, or they're not on
iPads are covered so far as it's a personal iPad, but if the teacher, the classroom, or the school provides an iPad for educational purposes, then that's permitted.
Do you have students who bring in personal iPads for school?
Yeah, I feel ambivalent. I have decided to keep. I'm not commenting on the next students. I don't know what I feel about it. But the iPads are, they're watching Netflix. They're distracted. It's huge of an issue. But then we don't have enough computers for kids.
So they bring them
So the iPads also help technically. So you use it for learning.
And you're in Kings World.
And I think to that point, it's important that we couple the conversation around these types of personal bans or provisions with ramped up resources for schools to provide tech that they need to advance the teacher education plans. And so like, that was a big part of the conversation several years ago with COVID, that it was a worry. Not as, like, not as. And so maybe we can maybe see advance in this bill, and talk about the needs for those additional funding so that teachers can provide students with the devices that they need for education.
We run into this issue at my school. We have school issued iPads and Chromebooks. And we run into this issue where the kids put personal iPads in the school iPad cases, and then we can't manage them through the Guardian software. So it's a big issue to keep in mind, definitely. So DC is definitely not the first place to consider a school cell phone ban. Different states go about it in different ways, including incentivizing the policy. So some states, including Delaware, Idaho, Pennsylvania, have incentives like providing funding to purchase pouches or lockers for phones if schools decide to implement a ban. Some places recommend it, some require, and then individual districts and localities have also implemented their own cell phone bans outside of DC. I know there's one in Northern Virginia right now that was just implemented. They're happening all across the country. So we're not the first. This is not unprecedented. And there are three main justifications in the DC bill that we're going to focus our discussion around today. The first one is that cell phone use interrupts concentration, which is necessary for learning and retention. The second focuses on the damaging mental health and interpersonal conflict issues of cell phone use. And then kind of as a result of these two, the test scores we know have not increased since COVID, and they're definitely concerning, with only 34% of students meeting or exceeding expectations in ELA and only 22.8 meeting or exceeding in math. So the question then becomes, would a cell phone ban have a substantial impact on these test scores?
So thinking about the first justification, so interrupting concentration, which is necessary for learning and retention, studies have shown that students ages 9 to 10 with the most screen time were having issues regulating emotions, inability to finish tasks, lower curiosity, more difficulty making friends, more difficult to care for, and lower in self-control. Having taught in grades 3 through 5 over the past 6 years, these are all things that I've definitely seen myself. And I also think a lot about DCPS has been really pushing for like productive struggle, and obviously that's something that us as teachers want from all of our students, and deep critical thinking. Technology is interrupting that because students are not building that skill of productive struggle and pushing past difficult conversations, difficult problems. So retention and recall, researchers concluded that mobile technology distractions with the statistically significantly affecting the ability of college age students to recall the content of lectures and readings. So even just like getting through a thought or getting through an argument, technology is interrupting that. And then it doesn't even just disrupt those with technology, it's a disruption to all students in the class, even those without technology. So definitely from a more anecdotal point, developmentally, students in this age are way more concerned about their peers and what's going on. So that's really difficult to manage if they're paying attention to those who do have technology and what they do. So that's a disruption.
Absolutely. And on top of that, if we track the point when smartphone use became mainstream in 2012, when more than 50% of Americans began reporting smartphone ownership, we saw that teen mental health has gotten notably worse since then. These really, really concerning graphs you can see up here. Over a 100% increase for boys and girls in suicides, major depression, and non-fatal self-harm. And we've kind of seen the gendered impacts of this as well. For boys, this increasing isolation and this focus on, suicide, and then for girls, the negative social impact are leading to self-harm and hospitalization. So obviously, we need to do something to help our teenagers. The question is, does banning this during school, is that going to have a significant impact, or is most of this impact coming from personal time? On top of this, we've got the negative academic impact. As you can see, the biggest decline in test scores have obviously been since 2020, since COVID. But if you look a little bit more closely, we can see, I'm picking up here a little closer. in 2012, that's really when we started to see a slight decline that then became a really sharp decline during COVID, and that 2012 matches up exactly with this increase in these huge mental health problems. So we see this clear connection between the two. We can see this globally, but we can really, really clearly see it in this nation report card that just came out last year. And so the question then becomes, will limiting self-image in the classroom reverse this trend? Will it have a significant impact on test scores, or is this something even bigger? So we're gonna move into discussion.
Yeah, so here we really want to discuss the policy. Do the benefits of removing the distraction of phones from the classroom outweigh the potential safety implications that we discussed earlier of making it harder for students and parents to reach one another during the school day? I'll read both, but feel free to jump in either. Should schools ban phone use only during class time or for the entire day? In other words, is a more social lunchtime worth making parents unable to reach their kids during the school day? We'd love to hear your experiences with this and also your thoughts. Really focusing on just how does this outweigh the concerns that parents have. And then just time.
I'm removed from the classroom 8 years now. I didn't allow my students to have cell phones. I taught English to high school students. I've never seen a positive aspect of that. And the students, the classroom has to be run correctly. Right? Because when I was on the board, I was in schools almost every day. Even in high schools, and not so much elementary school. Most of the elementary schools collected the phones. Kids would pick up their phones at no complaints, no thefts, no nothing like that. Someone was in charge of it. I'm totally against having cell phones. Turn my phone off. Because we know as adults, we didn't know anything about cell phones 20 years ago. And now if you can't find your phone, it's like the end of the world. And the president of the United States is on phone, his cell phone more than he is doing business. Right? So these are all old. I just think that this, to me, it's a no-brainer because of the teacher. I need the word that we see out there is distraction. I didn't want any distractions. I wanted distraction as a teacher. I wanted my students to be totally focused on what they were reading. So I didn't, every now and then the phone would ring. Although we collected them for the last couple of years, I was so they weren't supposed to happen. About lunchtime. That's counterintuitive to me. That's my own personal.
So counterintuitive in that it should be banned throughout the day.
Yes. Shouldn't do that. Students don't need to be on their phones during this time. The thing about parents and about dating, all that other stuff is the only thing that comes up is shootings in schools. Students are locked down in their classroom. That really is not stopping shootings in school.
I'm surprised at the list of justifications that what for me is the main justification I didn't see up there at this Empower Ed event. And that is that the threat to teaching as a profession and to the teaching and learning climate in schools is huge. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked with who have quit teaching because of cell phones in the classroom. It's that disruptive. And several of them were in New York City, where things maybe different, I don't know. But to me, that's the number one issue. And there should be no hesitation about doing something about something that's that disruptive. So, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you're saying also maybe addresses the question of phone use even outside of the classroom, because that like dynamic that you're talking about in the classroom is also impacting lunchtime. Are students like sitting alone, scrolling through things, or are they having discussions with one another? And so that bleeds out of the classroom. It's not.
I mean, it's physically addictive.
Yeah.
We know the science behind what phones are doing. So, no good parent doesn't limit phone time. And so schools need to play a positive role rather than capitulating to what the technology is doing to the whole society.
Yeah, and that's a good thing that we'll kind of get into of implementation, because something I've been thinking a lot about is, as an elementary school teacher, my students' parents are in kind of the phone generation. And so how do we get, which we'll talk about later, but the buy-in from parents, and how do we make sure parents are also demonstrating that and that they care about this? Because if parents don't share that value and they're also like modeling on their phones, that makes it really difficult to.
But I think the biggest crisis is in high school.
Yes, but if they're
And
growing up,
maybe
like our
those-
future students are watching their parents be like, here, take my phone while I grocery shop or whatever. Those are the students that will certainly at that time of brain development it'll be very hard to break that habit in those moments.
So we have numbers of what percentage of families support bills versus no.
Have some teacher surveys that the Washington Teacher Union put out. And I think it's 82% Washington Teacher Union members supported, but we don't have public data around students or parents. I mean, that's hopefully the benefit of having a public hearing is we'll hear from people, but that's also like the group who signs up. And so we've been, talking in community meetings about this. A lot of parents have reached out to me and share their concerns, but a lot of that is anecdotal, so it's a things.
But all the purpose, I appreciate going to like the piece of that, the digital curriculum is being addressed really at home and at school. I think the brain science behind it, but then also how all of it is designed is really key. And understanding that how it targets kids is really essential with that. But also regarding the times of day, we've been speaking with various school leaders, and if you like happen during lunch, everybody's in their respective grades, and then they come together and it issues them up really what's happening from social media. School leaders and students all agree social media stirs up the conflict too. If you talk to the kids though, should we limit it? They're like, no.
But they
Going
can
to the
articulate
addictive
that it
piece.
is completely.
Like, right, so, yeah.
So my question was around implementation. I apologize if this is getting ahead of ourselves, but because I work with Zach at Check, and our school already bans phones. Like the students are required to turn in their phones at security every morning. They don't get it until the bell rings at the end of the day. Now, do kids sneak in? Sure, that happens a lot. And it's like, how do we deal with that? Also, there's not a whole lot of consistent enforcement by the staff themselves around these issues. So how would this bill be any different than what we currently have? Like what exactly would be adding to our school's policy that we already have? Like if we're already having trouble as it is ensuring that the phones stay out of the building when they're supposed to be turned in, and having enough trouble as it is having deans or whoever taking these phones or actually responding to teachers who are asking for their phones to be taken up. Like why would this be doing in addition to that or change or why would this change? Is what I guess we're asking.
I heard from a couple of school leaders. Sometimes the pressure comes from families, whether I implement a policy or not. And I've heard literally from the school having a citywide policy would alleviate that in their part. So like this is the city, this is what we have to do. So there's that piece of it, but then it's also how do we make sure it's not the teachers enforcing it? Because we all know that becomes a headache in itself. So like having something in place where it's like the school admin is responsible for that, I think alleviates both ends of the spectrum for the teachers.
That leads really nicely into our next kind of thought on existing strategies, what is working right now, and how could this look in different schools, given that the bill does allow for schools to implement it to make sense for their setting. But keeping in mind the bill also allows for teachers to allow exceptions for instructional purposes. What are we doing about making sure that does not get out of hand as well? Individual teachers just being very loose with the phones and other teachers trying to enforce strictly.
Can I just add to this enforcement question? This was feedback that we got from a lot of teachers before we introduced the bill. And so we included language that clarifies it's not up to each teacher to enforce this, because we don't want to put another thing on teachers. And so every school has to basically have someone assigned who's responsible for making sure it's enforced. We thought that was another added layer of consistency, so that it's not like, okay, I need to deal with this teacher, or this teacher feels like they have to spend half their class enforcing something. There's someone else in the school whose responsibility it is.
I'm gonna add one piece, which is I think like the Dieter raised, like teachers are always going to disagree about this inside the school sometimes, and it's like every behavior. Like all the schools that we partner with and work with, you know, on wellness initiatives, like they're always one of the top things is like we want more alignment on student behavior policies. The problem with alignment is teachers themselves disagree about what we should really be enforcing and what is less important to enforce. And so like I don't think we're ever going to like be able to have a policy that says, you know, but I think what we can do, I think it like Philip said, like just to be able to say this is the law kind of helps people in a way sometimes, just to say like this is why we're enforcing it. But I do think that like it's not going to take away the need, in my opinion, to get together as a staff and figure out like how high on our priority list is this going to be. Because I think for a lot of teachers, this is much higher on their priority list as an enforcement thing than like hats in the class, right? And like a lot of times, like I experienced a lot of times in my school, like people would be like, these teachers enforce the hats, these teachers don't enforce the hats. And there would be like so much conflict about that. And like none of us cared that much if the kids were wearing hats, right? So like I also think it like merits a discussion within the like teaching staff, or like, do we really care about this? And are we as a team gonna choose to care about it?
I do think that right now around half of our phone calls, and even 2/3, are feeding the parents to have any exonerate. Don't bring yourself, right? I think that so much of our things are failing. Technology use is like it's always there. We have failing and technology use, right? And so my only question is just, does the city have the right to tell parents what they can or can't do? Right? Especially, you know, teaching, administration, disproportionately white, right? And then looking at our Black population of students here, our Latino population of students here, there's questions, right? But then we know that best practices is not bringing out hats. It's not.
And just real quick to go back to the safety concerns, like I totally get that. Like I'm super sympathetic to like the idea that this unfortunate reality that we live in this country where mass shootings are just a fact of life now, and you know, parents are justified worried that this could happen to their kids any day, right? I get that. You also have to remember that like this was unfortunately a thing even before cell phones, and schools still found a way to get in touch with parents for their kids, etc. So, and I'm not sure if this is in the bill already, and maybe it is, but like something that I've noticed in my school, for instance, you know, to kind of alleviate this concern, you know, is the functionality of the phones we have in our classrooms. When I first started to check, my phone didn't even work. And they didn't give me a new phone for like another year. And my phone currently is still programmed for another teacher who used to be in that classroom. So it's not even programmed for me. So like, what can we do to make sure that DGS and CPS actually, you know, assuage those concerns by just supporting the infrastructure that we already have and making sure that we have, you know, functioning phones, classrooms, or other technology that the schools need to get in touch with parents in emergency situations like that, right? Like, there's something like that happened, God forbid, in my classroom. Like, I can't rely on my phone. Like, I would have to use my own cell phone to like figure something out, right? Like there needs to be, I think, some sort of oversight as well to like how our currently existing infrastructure functions in times of crisis.
Which is like a trust building issue. It seems like making sure that parents have trust in the system in place at their school, so there's no doubt. I know no one's telling my kid this, right? You know, that is often a concern. That's the
To that exact point, I feel like DCPS had its infrastructure, and we're talking about all the separate charters. So back when I was a teacher, I remember we had lockdown, but there was no, like, we didn't have intercom systems. There was one time in class there was a lockdown, I had no clue.
Yeah.
So it's across the board, DCPS, I know has a process, but how do we make sure communication is strengthened across all the areas?
I'm thinking a lot about what you were saying about communication with families, and in particular, also communication with students when this gets implemented. Because I do a lot of work with high school students, and I think they are actually very cognizant of the problem and the negative effect on their lives. And a lot of that problem definitely is happening in schools, but a lot of it's happening outside of school. One of the things that that's like was the thing that I say
I have my
is how
assumptions,
this is
I
affecting
don't
their
want to assume, but
and sleep is like actually the big thing that's affecting their mental health, because they go home and then they'll tell me that we have sessions where they look at their phone and their screen time, and so much of it is happening between midnight and 3 a.m. like that. And so this is a really good first step, but I feel like it would be interesting if we could think about a citywide communications campaign to go with it that explains the why, that makes a public health awareness about all of those implications for everybody, so everyone knows that and has access to that information. Because I think if parents knew that, it would offer them a different way of thinking about things, and maybe even have that come from the young people. Like, could that communications campaign come from the voices of young people talking about what it feels like in their body to get 4 hours of sleep because they're addicted to their phones? And I think they would say something. I think they'd do it.
The most convincing argument we had about the cell phone usage in schools came from the superintendent who's in charge of junior schools, middle schools, and CPS. Because the middle schools in DCPS have a cell phone policy, singular cell phone policy. Principals can adjust it, but there's a ban on cell phones in all of the middle school. Many do tremendous hands raised, and yeah, to me, I didn't know that, and until they testified, and it was like manna from heaven for us passing our resolution, because DCPS already has it in place. All the system doesn't have a policy. So DCPS does not have a policy. It's the largest area for cell phone. What is legislation? Because our resolution was passed in December. And but it doesn't have the weight that the city council legislation. So haven't signed. It's too late to sign up. Sign up.
You can submit your testimony.
Oh, that's right. You can still. That was what was because I brought up the legislation because I know personally in my classroom how not handle so. I think there are a distraction to all of us. But having DCPS come and testify on that policy, it's in the middle schools, not the elementary schools, not the high school, but in the middle schools. Because I just like nobody in the world. I'm sure that people down.
So I guess before we move on to implementation, have any of you like experienced or seen things that have been really successful in schools, things that have really worked?
I think the diversity of policies across the city, whether it's DCPS or charter, is really innovative. Like some schools utilize like, hey, donated pencil pouches, and we put this out at the doors, and we have the entire system. We have other schools where they share like a high school and middle school. They have differentiated policies based off the middle and the high school. Mobile lockers, the little we have in classroom based lockers, and the kid takes the key with them. So there's a lot of innovation around the city itself, which I appreciate the flexibility as well.
I appreciate you saying that as well, because I think there's the perception that we have to spend a lot of money on an tech company's product. And I know I can think for my school, we just have a bunch of Costco bins with pencil cases in them. They're labeled with the student's last log, and they put the phone in the that's the case, we lock up the box, and it shows up in last month when we give us. So very, very cheap implementation, and maybe not the necessity to spend a good amount of city money on a very expensive technology solution. Are there other policies that you've seen work, including policies for consequences for phones? We are gonna go to consequences on the next slide, so if that comes up now, feel free.
I've actually seen a policy in my younger sister's high school. She goes to boarding school. So they're not allowed to have their phones at all during the week. And I think they only have their phones for 5 hours total during the entire week. So initially, obviously they handle their phones to their relevant teachers or authorities at the beginning. But yeah, initially there was a lot of resistance because the students thought they couldn't handle it. But after a while, they just got accustomed to the reality. So I think that was a really positive experience for that.
Yeah, which goes to like building stamina, student stamina, which maybe is part of the implementation of how you build that stamina in kids and in parents. We can go to, we can go to Janice. I mean, the one that comes to mind first for me, and then I'm really curious what you all is, what happens when a phone is found mid-class? I think that's something teachers really struggle with. I did start in the middle school, and that was something that I really struggled with, was like, everyone was like, don't touch the kid's phone, you don't want that behind up, but then it becomes an issue mid-class of like, I leave it on my desk and then get it out, like there's so much inconsistency around like the hiccups in the plan, and so that to me is one of the biggest things, like what is the what if?
And on top of this, we're going to bill prohibits suspensions, expulsion, or removing students from instructional time, which as a teacher in a school that for a long time really overused ISS, we had a lot of students putting in school suspension for phones. So from your perspective of what this is adding, I do think prohibiting use of suspension and in-school suspension, removing students from class is very powerful for the schools that maybe are using that. My school thankfully has stopped doing that, but for those schools that are still leaning on that, but without that consequence, what works to actually enforce it? What would kids care about?
An emphasis on the like logical consequence of like it has to connect in a kid's brain, and maybe that's my school just talks a lot about logical consequences of like taking a recess isn't really a consequence for calling out too much in class. Like that doesn't quite make sense. So what would be a consequence for it? That makes sense. Yeah.
The way I think about it is, for students, their most valuable possession is their cell phone, but behind that, it's probably their time, right? Like they don't want to be at school past 3:15 or wherever the bell rings, right? So if we just give like after school detention, it's like that would be like a sort of, I would never advocate for like suspension or expulsion, but like detention's a pretty sort of like mild sort of repercussion, right? I think that would be like, hey, you are wasting time in class, so we're not wasting your time after school because you can't seem to follow instructions, right? So like another thing my school does, for instance, is, and it's applied inconsistently, which is the problem, is that sometimes if students are caught on their phones, they're confiscated, and then their parents have to come to the school themselves at the school to confiscate them or get the phone back from those administrators, whoever, right? So like either you dock their time at the end of school, or you make their parents come to school and you piss them off for having to come to school for that, or a combination of the two. But I think that's at least for me right now, that's like the only thing I can think of the consequence of the state.
My question is that how effective at my school, I'm at Eastern Pennsylvania, and we've been in a period where the collectors and phones were not allowed and student phone things. It's not one that you have them as a consequence, how they follow through, you have after school attention, and we have kids like after attention. So how do you really enforce having consequences for this? And then even if the parents come to pick up the phone, parents get frustrated, they get bad with administration, they get to the point where they don't care. So how do you
high school, check
Practices and learn about start practices, which is some different session from they don't work for them. So self-consequence system. So you need to first think about it and get to understand and practice that and teach solution skills in terms of one. But you also come as a community to say there's a problem. Give them the dancing. They need to learn those skills too. A child cancer with other parents. And it works. I've seen it myself as a parent, I've seen it as a teacher, and I've done it with confidence like and also so it works. It's a different thing, we need to invest in. So that's an alternative.
This is only using this at check.
So use that check, I used it in a different place. I got out of PCPS, but I don't check, is using it in some other schools in PCPS. So if you get more information, there's gonna be a session for it. But it's another alternative, proposing it. So impute it, but
I think about the board, it's like, it's different, like, especially from outside of the group. So, we have whole parents who are engagement, and I'm actually, my job, I'm a registrar. I'm still a teacher, so I'm seeing the whole into it. So, just to get parents to come in and sign a form for their child's being enrolled, you know, we can see it started. So, trying to do this.
yeah, it's different, but it's work that is worth to do. For the children, for the school, for the parents too. But you get them there. Training first, and then it follows. But it's an alternative. I'm not saying it's gonna solve it. It's an alternative. And a better one. I've seen it. What do you?
Yeah, so this is like really great conversation, because I'm at Duke Ellington, cell phone policy drives my passion for falling down the tree background again. It seems as though with creativity being accessible to principals at different schools to come up with their, you know, their routine, come up with a plan that works, that's viable, perhaps set the plan in place for a year, alternatives to having kids with cell phone usage. For example, cell phones per class is for emergency purposes, that kind of things, kind of drawing on that kind of creativity before they start asking for kids to put their phones away, making that kind of a demand, because we need the parent buy-in in order for it to work. So coming up with alternative ways to communicate with parents should emergencies arise. What are the different ways that works for your particular school? Implement the policy in the school. Give it some time to get your staff to buy into it as well, because teachers will often, I know it happens in my school, they won't try to enforce kids off the cell phone because there's no real support from administration because of the pushback from the kids and the parents. It's a chronic problem across society, period, let's face it. So coming up with creative solutions and then trying those out consistently over perhaps the course of the school year. And then start to engage parents in, well, this is a policy we've set in place, so you can feel comfortable and confident knowing that if an emergency does arise, here's an alternative way that we will reach out to you so your kid doesn't have to carry the cell phone around with them every single class and be distracted from learning. So it's like a growing process that we have to actually use time, perhaps, to create and implement, and then look for buy-in. Because if we jump off the bat, it's, you know, all the arguments are going to be had. So it's frustrating. If y'all can sense my frustration.
What is the policy?
So we have it written on the walls, classroom walls in the school. No cell phone should be visible from 8:30 to 5. No earpods, no cell phones, none of those things should be visible. That means if you have one in your person, that's fine, but I shouldn't see them. So I'm one of the teachers who says, take it off, put it away when they come into the classroom, but not every teacher's gonna do that because of the pushback they receive from the kids and the parents. You know, so we have to somehow build relationship and trust around this issue because they're absolutely a distraction from learning, period, full stop. I can't teach or engage you in the text we're reading through. You got your earbuds in, you got music in your ears. And kids hide these things under their hair. So I tell them when they come to class, let me see your ears. I'll take them out, put this stuff away, but not every teacher's gonna do that. So again, coming up with
Can't be
creative.
visible is like,
It's vague.
it's not,
It is. It's,
you gotta be attacked.
so.
That's two.
So, yeah, 1, 2, 3.
I was that kid in high school with my bush stickers and I had my headphones sometimes.
Yeah, we all the
Exactly. That's what before I cut my sideburns. No, I think some districts is the tiered approach that I've seen that's more interesting. Like first time, obviously, the admin's in charge of that, and that's the key part too. But then by the time it gets like tier 3, it's like okay, parental involvement or from leaders as far as like that's like $1,000 piece of technology on the parent, the student side. Parents like, look, we can have this. I think that's an opportunity for like that parental like education or something. Also like the student side, you want this to be off, right? How do you leverage both of those needs? But I think that tiered approach across the districts is really
Yeah, and that also makes me think of like front loading all of these systems for parents. It's the same with, like kids don't like surprises, neither do parents. And when you front load that throughout the summer and then you do that work, because I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like our biggest issue is you call a parent too much, it's like you're done. You've lost the trust, you've lost the relationship. Yeah, and then you're like, okay, I might as well have not done this, which maybe it goes hand in hand with the tiered approach and starting early to make sure that it's like very solidly built in. Parents can expect it, kids can expect it, and then they'll follow through.
A quick announcement real quick before you go to lunch. So there's gonna be like a 15-minute break to grab your lunch, which is around the corner in the kitchen there. And there's a nice outdoor deck you can take it to. There's a kitchen area out there. And then we'll also have 3 lunch chats starting at 12:15. So all the way down the next hallway in the Mexico City room is if you're working at a community school or connected school, lunch chat. And then if you're a parent who's also an educator, that's in the kitchen. And then the Buenos Aires room around the corner will be for our Black Educator Social. So if you go and join one of those groups and want to join one of those lunch conversations, feel free to. Otherwise, the posters will be out here, network, and then the next session will start at 12:55.
So we have 2 more and then Rachel will close.
One and two, and then if you want.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you both for moderating this discussion and thank everybody for the participation. This is extremely useful to us. Our minds are working on a lot of different ideas of how we can help implement a lot of the great ideas that have been shared. I wanted to just comment on something quickly of the safety concern, because this is the number one pushback I'd like here, so that we're all armed with the same information. Is that in a school shooting or some real emergency, it is not safe for students to be looking down, using their cell phones, texting their parents, as much as I, of course, understand the parent wants to know what's happening. But that is not the safest thing for the student. They need to be, right, totally. They need to be listening to the adult in the classroom and getting to the student. Like, so I think we need to have some re-education of this. And I have been surprised how many students have come to me during this process and said, my parent is calling me all day.
Yes. Or like my lunch is outside.
Yes, right, they won't stop calling me, and so that's an education. And then just lastly, I love this idea of using this moment as a citywide education for gun detrimental. Cell phones are, we, of course, can't really legislate what goes on in the home and parenting. That's not an appropriate place for the legislative body, but it is an appropriate place as a community to talk about these detrimental effects, talk about how important sleep is. I love that point. And so let's all continue the conversation after we head through the hearing on Tuesday about how to have that collective conversation. Maybe it's similar talking points that everyone gets for PTA meetings, or at the start of the school year, that we're all going to sing the same song. This year.
Oh yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about that. So I am a member of the community. I am not an educator and I don't have kids. So I'm very happy to be here because it does make me think a lot about my own experience, right? So when I went to college, I graduated from early 2010s. In college, we were not allowed to use laptops nor cell phones during class. Like, it was just absolutely right. So I know it's a little bit intense and that probably doesn't look like here, but I know that it absolutely made so much better as an educational experience. And I can see the difference because now as an adult, specifically after 2020, I know I got more addicted to it. And I don't recognize what what you showed us, that it's also happening at least to me as an adult and I would even events. So I absolutely just wanted to reinforce this idea that this is a complicated issue and that it affects everybody. I see it in my parents who hated, when I was a teen, hated like the idea of us being on the phone. And they are now so addicted to it.
It's almost like my grandpa's like so
addicted to it. So now in this, now my sister and my children were like, what are you doing? Put down the cell phone. It's so I do think like the bike thing, I mean again I don't have the experience of anything like that, but I do feel like the buying is that it's an issue that is affecting all of us. And I see this a lot, it's just to wrap up, because again as a member of the community that likes to be involved, likes to be present in the talk, I hear a lot of pushback and it's like, you don't have kids. If you're not, like you don't understand. And it's like the idea that somehow the fact that I don't have kids does not like it doesn't isolate me from the kids that I live around.
Which to me is like even more important that like we're not losing that sense of community and phones are completely going.
I mean, this is again an idea of how important it is to surround something that is a societal issue. And like this idea that like you can't say anything because you don't have kids, or you can't say anything to like phone exclusion like parents or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but I need like I live with these kids, like we share this public spaces, so we should be as involved.
It's an amazing we all understand.
So we don't want to keep going. But we really want to stay in the room and keep discussing.
Hi, Mark, see you.
Busy, yes. Usual.
Yeah. I try to stay busy. I see you're
Get him back.
I know.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Okay, and if you wanted to just sit down or whatever.
No, it's fine. I think it's like okay, let me just put the slides.
I'm really glad but yeah, I was and our principal teacher had no parent organization whatsoever because she has the impression that I have this parent so now having a big building, so even if it's
Also,
I'll see you soon, if you both soon, I just wanted you all the time.
That's always evolving needs.
I know. So I'll see you both soon.
Absolutely. No, I see you as
Brooklyn phone was required. You want to just
Right.